It's almost like running in a labyrinth. It feels like you've been saying the same thing over and over. Almost like the closer you think you're getting to the finish line, the furthest you are from victory. Nothing is changing, except black people are dying.
What have we done?
Kannete, black people are dying. But we're still talking about some of the issues that are happening. Ke racism, ke gender-based violence. So nna be ke kgopela gore re tsaya mogao wa sebakanyana. Re ba gopole ba latlhegileng maphelo a bona ka tlase ga yona kgatelelo. With a heavy heart, ke le dumedisa. Ke la amogele mo ga Daily Thetha on SABC 1. Nna ka leina ke nna Nicolette wa ga Mashile kgarebe ya kwa Bushbuck Ridge Mapulaneng. Yena re tshware lona leleme la matsego ke seswa rune Andisa wa ga Kebashe. Mashaledi ya mmusho wa apartheid sa na tswella pele mo South Africa. Bo sesi le wa abuti ba rona ba gwa bjale ka dimpya. Why? Because they black? Mmala wa rona o na le eng that makes people hate us so much. Racism is hatred. You've got to be able to recognize gore re tlhoiwe. So sorry se busantsana le gone go gore na ye fella kae na. Ke mang a tshwantsa tse mo karabelo. Who is responsible to end racism not only in South Africa but across the world? As I said, it is hatred at the end of the day. Re bona ntse se shishimisang across America, China, Europe. So ke a go botsisa le gone e tlo fella kae.
Bathi safa saphela isizwe kungani mina ntomnyama ngihluphekile kanje yini le ngake ngayenza engenza ukuthi mina njalo ngihlezi ngikhala ingane na 6 ithi mama umbala wami ngathi unenkinga lengane engidlala nayo ngifuni yenzeni lengane lani sibona ukuthi noma ifike emsebenzini black child I'm not good enough just because of the color of my skin, even though my degree is the same, even though my money is the same, kodwa le ndlela mina engiphathwa ngayo ayifani kodwa yini lesayenza sethi sibuze wena mbukeli usekhaya yini esiyenzile cela ukuthi ukhulumane nathi enkundleni zokucommunicator social media on 072 316 1329 noma ungashayela ucingo 011 339 1315.
And of course, Melody, we're not having this conversation by ourselves. Social media George Floyd are in South Africa. There is structural racism too. It is preventing us to get jobs we have studied for. The struggle is real and it has real costs. And that's the thing. Sometimes racism directly, it also means that there isn't racism. Racism is everywhere, it is structural. But of course, we're not having this conversation. Really no Shimoga Daily Thetha. And right now, we're joined by Lebohang Pheko, who's a political economist and a renowned research fellow at Trade Collective. Let's put racism into context. Sesi Lebohang, welcome to Daily Thetha. Lebohang Pheko, welcome to Daily Thetha.
Thank you.
Hi, Lebohang.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning to you and to the listeners.
A beautiful good morning to you, Sesilebu. Sesilebu, you always speak about context and how important the racism issue is in being contextualized, especially the countries like America, US, and South Africa.
So I think the point that I'd like to make is that there's difference between the texture of life and black life and the currency of black life in different countries. It is one thing for us as African people on an African continent with a black-led government to be speaking about Black Lives Matter when we are a numeric and a political majority. That is a completely different texture and context. How well about Dulankana Mose, America, United Kingdom, Holland, and Babu but and it is very important to mabaka ao hobaneng he ha baneng re sa etialo that like into ke bitsang false solidarity. So in terms of that black lives are important globally, but the texture and the context of those black lives are not the same. It's very strange for us to tell Cyril Ramaphosa Black Lives Matter when he's also Atonali Ronaso. Atonali how wale Donald Trump kapo Boris Johnson or Black Lives Matter bani bona baba sweu and itile banale into bitwang white privilege, banale historic privilege, banale colonial legacy, banale into tsenga the baba amang bailing horba twantu badi arabe, of which how wale President Ramaphosa kapo President Uhuru Kenyatta wako Kenya, President Buhari wako Nigeria, habana baggage ya colonialism, ya batho ba batsho. So kiri language ya rona hai, it has to be completely different because the structures of our society, the context of our society are not at all the same. Even though I agree that international solidarity among African people of descent and African people on the continent, it is extremely important. But I don't think that we can be saying Black Lives Matter in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in the same way as we would say so in America. The Black lives of Marikana are not the same as the Black lives of George Floyd.
And then what would we call it? Because it might be it's even more heinous, more Africa, because we are black. The majority is black. Why are we still fighting? Yes. So what is yes?
Then it's a structural issue. It shows where the state our states have inherited a lot of machinery. So how do states muso lefatshe megatlo ya dipolitiki sisole sepolesa dintho tseo kaofela akere ke machinery e matisang setjhaba, state machinery. So that machinery yona has got its own DNA, it's got its own context. So the machinery sometimes is not necessarily undone. So the machinery that we're seeing, especially in South Africa, I won't speak so much about Nigeria, about Kenya or other places, but I'll speak about what I know very closely and more intimately. The machinery that machinery ya apartheid colonial machinery. And in 1994, we didn't dismantle it in the way that we needed to. But it also goes to show that states often have the same character. It can be South Africa, can be France, can be UK, it can be India, it can be Brazil. But that machinery, if it's toxic, it will have the same results almost no matter who is running it, whether it's an African person, a European-led government, an African-led government. The machinery almost runs on its own. And unless we have people at the helm, they are going to dismantle this intentionally. It starts with the small things. So cold drink is that the traffic cop. Let's honor our part of that toxic machinery.
So minangbuze because abantu abaningi who are today leading us are the people who abaphile ekhathini za apartheid. Kodwa ayibona ngathi nabo they sit and they do not dismantle the system okhuluma ngayo. In work forums they become part of the system and not people are breaking the chain. What are we doing wrong in that department?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because what it shows, colleagues, when people go into power without wanting to contend with power, without wanting to wrestle with power, and without wanting to transform power, but only wanting to participate and transact power for their own gain, then we were going to get these sorts of results which are lack consciousness, lack compassion, and lack a human element. So it's the same. It's unfortunate that ya imperialism, ya colonialism, but baba swe batluhile mona Africa khale le mona Africa borwa batluhile ka 1994 mafateng a mang batluhile ka bo 1960 1962 1965. As we know, runa mona Africa borwa re ne re morao haholo ho ditjhaba tse ding mona Africa ka mabaka a mangata mpaneneng ho bontsha fela hore that colonial machinery. And it's very unfortunate that the machinery is so strong and toxic that even once those who were the architects of that machinery are gone, Tanzania is sebeta. Even though slavery, human trafficking in its original form was dismantled, we see that it's still active.
Because now after the ad break, but because we need to go deeper into the thing, we've not inherited a system, Pela, but we've inherited a system with Abantabamyama. After the ad break.
Absolutely.
Our own sin.
Right here, Daily Thetha, racism. Is it something we should still be dealing with? But also, this fallacy, Rainbow Nation, were we really duped with it? Did we just jump and decide, we are part, we're going to sing Kumbaya together? This racism. We're still joined by Lebohang Pheko, who is really an amazing person in terms of it's gone further and beyond. And there's a great understanding. And this system to dismantle it. Lebohang, welcome back to Daily Thetha.
Okay, ma'am.
Lebohang, maybe perhaps this ideology, Rainbow Nation. What are your feelings towards it?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Rainbow Nation is a bit of a trick. And I think that my thoughts on that, Rainbow Nation, fiction inyana, the so-called reconciliation. And it was a project that was needed to really and actually to prevent black people to manage black people's anger. And I think that the problem with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Rainbow Nation is that it tells a lie that this is a melting pot. It also tries to dislocate black people and African people as the owners and the custodians of this land. Rainbows have many colors, and this is a majority African country. It was also a concession to make other people, minority groups, especially former, white settlers, the white settler minority, feel comfortable because they carry capital and industrial interests. And I think that it was really very unfortunate because in
Mapheko. Sorry, I just want to know, as you're discussing the Rainbow Nation, it's a bit of a fictitious ideology. Do you feel it's done more harm than good in addressing some of the issues of racism?
Of course, it's done more harm also because it has actually tried to to anesthetic operationing anesthetic anesthetic le operation ya teng go go le betere ha ba neng go go le na le dibuisano tsa hore re tla ba le restoration, restitution, the reparation. Ntho ya Rainbow Nation, I think in the Islapo again that thing that the Bishop this idea that we all belong, it's not true because we don't all belong in the same way.
To understand, njengomzali, you have a 6-year-old ingane ebuya esikolweni ikhali inyembezi, and you ask them what's wrong. Actually, ukuthi they experienced ubandlululo esikolweni. They called her name engangibize ku TV. How do you as a parent react in this day and age? So if you find that your daughter or son comes home and they experience racism, how do you as a parent react to that, to mntana wakho?
It happens all the time. It happens in our schools. And then to able to karuna ka rainbow kuri eto ya ka hoja dintho tsena ha di sa le teng. into your iyenze hore fela batho ba thule. So at some stage in the 90s, it was like it's unfashionable.
Yeah.
How buaka racism ike ka hoja ko wena a isang batho morao. Don't look back. And this notion that we're not allowed to look back and that black people's pain must be sanctioned, must be silenced by external forces is extremely violent. And leona ki violence, leona ki colonialism
Yeah.
hobane ko khatella batho, ko khatella leleme la batho. And not surprising, and it erupts in different ways.
Yeah. Sithisibonga kakhulu isikhathi sakho. Thank you so much for sharing your insights namhlanje nathi ku Daily Thetha. We appreciate your time. Sithi hleli kanje endabeni nakhona, we think racism is something we meet just emsebenzini or abanye esikolweni, not knowing that we actually meet racism nakhona nje emgaqweni just driving to work. We see a story of a lady who got to experience racism ahamba nomuntu wakhe, and something that blew up South Africa. Have a look what happened.
You have a license. Okay. I want you to go to.
Do you want to see it? Do you want to see
I
it?
want to see it.
Wow.
Fucking stupid. God.
I'm done, babe.
Man, done. You cunt. I'll you up. I'm telling you now. I will you up. I will you up.
Now you've got two. You've got
you up.
assault.
I will. I don't care. You
Assault.
up. You
Baby, I was taking a video. Oh, now I'm a wow. Terrorist, something golf terrorist.
Golf terrorist. There's not a
Ukuthi sometimes nokuthi siyele emsebenzini kwenzeka iphutha, which is something like an accident, but in that uhlangabezana nokuthi you're no longer someone who was either the victim because ushayisiwe, but you also become the victim of umbala wakho because you are particularly black. And in this case yabona kule video Siphosethu Ngomane, who experienced something that no one wants to experience avukisela emsebenzini, where she ended up finding herself being met with controversy, met with a sense of fear, but also a sense of being discriminated because of her color. She joins us today, Lagu Daily Thetha. Siswami, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, akusichazele kancane Siswami, that morning, cela usifake kancane what happened in its shortest explanation.
Well, it's actually in the evening. We were driving back from work, and what we had saw was a guy who was in front of us was driving, and he lost control of his car, drove into a lamppost, and being the good citizen that I am, not even just being a good citizen, just being a decent person, Jay, was the first thing that came to mind was, wait, let's just stop and see if we can't help. Because when we looked over, Uputi was in a seizure, you know, and having had experience with that and having seen like a few of my family members in that kind of state, I knew he was helpless. So that us driving away would have just, we wouldn't have known what would have happened to him or anything. So I thought, let's stop and see if we can't help. So we pull up and we put the hazards on as we would, and we jump out, we go and we try and help. And as we're helping this person, the medics come, but it's not the ones we called, because I was calling for the ambulance, right? And the people that were there were not the ones that I had called, and I had a reference number that they give for the ambulance. So I was waiting for them to get there so I can give them the reference number, so they knew that that was the scene that I called. Yeah, just watching that takes me back like so much, because I was just about to leave and I was giving this one lady the reference code because I was like, it's getting late, I'm cold, I want to go home. As I'm giving her the code, this lady drives straight into us, right? Now, as you can imagine, I think in that moment we were just like, what? Right? So we're like, what? We run over there to see if the damage is big, if it can be solved. I'm like, excuse me, did you not see the car? It had, like, I'm not gonna lie to you. I was, I think, the most polite. And I was like, did you not see? And she was like, it was an accident. And she just went on, she got out the car and continued.
What
you know,
and I'm really sorry for your situation, Elona, because I can't imagine gore o tswile go kolong ya gago ipakile di hazard di on o batla go thusa someone else, and in that you end up there's no good deed that goes
unpunished. Indeed.
Can you maybe refer to some of the things that she was saying?
Okay, so some of the things were bleeped out because half of the things that came out of her mouth were swear words. And those are one of the first things that came out. Instead of saying, I'm sorry, let's talk about it, let's try and see if we can fix it. No. It was, I think she spoke from a point of privilege that she was entitled to doing what she did, and therefore she was entitled to not
like receiving any thing or
It's like, it's not a big deal. Why are you angry? Like, why are you even reacting? I think from her point of view, it was a whole thing, Yoguti, why are you angry? Don't be angry, don't react, don't retaliate. Like, people like you don't have to behave that way. You just take it, you don't give it. On. You know what I mean?
So if it would have been a different
definitely,
situation.
Completely. I mean, even after the incident, how it was dealt with, for me, I was just so, like, I was defeated, you know? Had I not had proof, had I not put it on social media, I promise you right now, I wouldn't even be sitting here, this conversation wouldn't be happening, because I think our justice system, just the whole system that we live under, has put us into a cocoon that actually...
right there, because I think a lot of merit in Liepollo, and want to continue to have the conversation around it. Of course, we're going to have you after Papacho just to carry on, because I think sometimes when you experience racism, to some of us in South Africa, it is still a shock. So do stay with us after Papacho. Welcome back to Daily Thetha. The price of being at the wrong place at the wrong time is death. The price of being black is death. That is the price and that's what we're talking about. What is now the cost? At that point when Siphosethu was speaking to this lady and saying, at what point did she have to start understanding, I'm now the victim of a racial incident? Instead of it just being a pure accident, it has now become a racial incident.
And because you're also trying to deal with the accident, now you have to deal with the incident.
Emotional intelligence. This lady can literally stand on my neck, just like George Floyd in America. Still to carry on with our conversation, Siphosethu, Ngomane.
Yes, ma'am.
About the injustice that you spoke about before Papa Jarona.
Okay, so just to go back to the fact that it was reported immediately. I think even in the video you can see my partner's on the phone speaking to the police. We called the police for the first accident. They didn't arrive. So for the second accident, they didn't arrive. And and you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait and still nothing is happening. And this person is still going rogue. And I think when my partner was telling me to calm down, like I think he was even... because he's like, baby, you don't know if these people have a gun.
Exactly.
So you don't know if they're gonna like come at us sideways, like just calm down. And I was like, I am calm. All I'm doing is I'm taking a video. This is evidence. I have to take a video. You know, and I think he was just like, continue doing that, but don't aggravate this person. And I'm like, what? Well, like I'm not doing anything to aggravate this person. Like this person is genuinely angry.
Would you say umuntu wako was a coward for which he retaliated? Because a lot of people said that.
No. I was on Twitter. Him and I were actually on Twitter together, and we were just laughing at the comments because it's so easy for Mundulo Ngeko in that situation to just be like, yeah, you should have done this, you should have fought. It's easy. Like it's so easy for you to sit and be a Twitter gangster. Like it's easy, you know, because now you're sitting on the other side of the screen on your phone, you know, but you're not in that incident. You're not in that moment. You don't understand the dynamics of that whole situation. I mean, I think you can see like there were so many people standing by. Not even a single one of them came to our rescue. Not a single one of them held this woman back and said, don't do that. Why is that?
Siphosethu, just a quick last one. Kidi 16, it's a June, Youth Day. How are you feeling as a young person in South Africa?
I feel misplaced.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a mouthful. I guess Sise Uthando Wakumete, who is a lawyer but also an activist, joining us. Sister Thando, welcome to Daily Thetha.
Sister Thando, welcome to Daily Thetha.
Hello, Daily Thetha. Thank you for having me.
Hello, Ms. Kumete. How are you feeling? It is 16th of June. We're supposed to be in celebration, but almost every single day, racism.
And but I think the real problem that we have in South Africa is that when it comes to race relations and these types of conversations, we start from 1940, when what we should be doing is starting from colonial era. Because racial segregation and oppression in South did not begin in 1948. In fact, the first racial segregation laws were put in place in South Africa by 1913. By 1913, there were actually a bunch of laws which made sure that black people were nowhere near white man's economy, white man's land, you know, in inverted commas. And so, as a feminist, as an intersectional feminist, and as an activist, mine is to reconcile the truth with our current daily experiences. So first of all, the phenomenon that we have, that we're experiencing in our society, is something called white heteropatriarchy. White heteropatriarchy is characterized with elements of something called white ideology and whiteness. And what whiteness believes is that white people or people with a fair skin are more superior to any other human being. And it is proven, or according to these people who are proponents of whiteness, according to these people, religion as well as science dictates that black people especially are fundamentally inferior to white people. So let me give you an example. The Afrikaner nation in South Africa believed, according to religion, that they were placed in Africa to look after black people and Africans because they were inferior of mind and inferior in every single way. So in fact, what we've seen in South Africa is white people having called a God complex. They genuinely believe that they are closer to God than any other human being in the world.
Maybe on top of that, Sister Thando, just quickly to bring back Siphosethu, because it's very interesting in Sister Thando. So did you feel she was reacting the way she was reacting, the lady, because she's never had to be confronted because of that whiteness?
Precisely. And for me, I think being a young person, having grown up in the system and having experienced these things, like I actually grew up with a lot of multiracial friends growing up, like all my life. And for me, I don't see you as superior to me because we're the same. We bleed the same blood. If I have a heart attack right now and you need a heart transplant, you could take mine. It doesn't matter which color of skin you are. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I don't see you as a god or a demigod, for instance. So for me, I think if you're going to want to be placed on that pedestal like our parents did or our grandparents did, it's not going to take. I'm not part of that generation where I'm going to bow down to you. I will respect you, but I will not bow down to you. It's not going to happen.
If you look at do you believe the South African law actually protects the black child?
Oh, come on. No, it doesn't. Remember that. So the reason why I'm giving this backstory is I want to show to you how deep and how systematic operates. So what white people did is that they implanted themselves in all of the spaces where our society is controlled. They implanted themselves in their ideology in our law. They implanted themselves in their ideology in the economy. They implanted themselves in their ideology in land distribution. and every other important space in society. So marching against it, protesting, it won't do anything. What we have to do, and this is where we are failing, and this is the tragedy about the Collins Khoza case, is that we don't see that whiteness has penetrated even black communities. The death of George Floyd, the death of Collins Khoza, and even the murder of Siphosethu are all part of the same system of heteropatriarchy, of white heteropatriarchy.
Thando.
When the reason I say this is because a black soldier believed that the life of a black man
is not important,
was less important than that of a white person, and thought that it was okay for them to gun down in their own homes. That's why you had black police during the apartheid era who were beating up black people. It was because black people see themselves as inferior, even amongst themselves. And they would kill a black man before they would kill a white man. They would confront a black person before they confront a white person.
Thando, I waibeya taba ke yona non raikwa man limpela on Facebook len ari racism is institutionalized in South Africa. The black man can still be put in a coffin alive. Leadership of this country has abandoned their politics and surrendered their blackness. I mean, it doesn't get more realer than that, and perhaps maybe it's also something that we can speak to you about. How then do we change it? Bari and Thando has just reiterated that. So before we go to the break, can you tell us, how do we change that?
I think it's the love of self. Loving yourself as a black person and your fellow sister.
Yeah.
Irrespective of what language they speak, where they come from, their financial status, just as a black person embracing one another. I think black people, we don't do that often enough. You know, even when she speaks of it, like I'll walk into a Pick and Pay, the lady won't even respond. She won't even look at me twice. And she won't even offer me a plastic bag. Something as basic as a plastic, I have to ask for it. Everything. You know, the attitude. But had it been Mariki who was in front of me, the first thing she says, "Good morning, ma'am. What do you need? Anything else? Do you want me to give you something else?" You know, that it's the love and hate of self. Like that's just where it all starts.
It's what I say, because you just tapped into something. That fear. Where does the fear actually come from? Please stay with us.
Welcome back to Daily Thetha on SABC 1. Sisijabulisa sisahleli nathi. And akhona futhi siloke sibuka ngempela the depth of racism. Ubuhlungu esihlangabezana nawo every single day. Besicabanga just how we have to go through these things. But nakhona besicomplaina kube ngazuthi siyadefa. You know, and coming from a generation where our parents had to go through this in this day and age, is there the right space to complain with I'm experiencing racism? Is it something that police see as a criminal act? But maybe also, what do we need to do to approach the situation differently without considering violence? This conversation has khuluma kuphela kuyithina. We did invite Steve Hofmyer, we did invite AfriFrom, who are people who have a different view and approach to this conversation, but unfortunately abazanga ukuthi babe khona nathi lamhlanje, so asikhuluma kuphela nathi. But we do all ask ukuthi Pheko, you have a different approach, please send us a message, speak to us, sizokwazi ukufunda kwezinye izinto. Kodwa sinosisa, a young lady who also joins us here with Daily Thetha. Sisi ayisixoshanga nje obuhleli lapho, senzela social distancing as umthetho ucela. Usisi Thandiwe Ntshinga, who also is a young activist who has beliefs that are really interesting for me now. But I want to understand, Siswami, how do you feel as a young person in this time right now?
I mean, we are dealing with racism. We have been dealing with racism. To be upset that we're still dealing with racism, I think maybe is a little bit unfair. Our parents dealt with overt racism, with the most dramatic racism. Right now, our struggle is a little bit more covert than that. We're dealing a lot more with the structures, the institutions that are maybe not as loud, but we experience them. So yeah.
But maybe what you've just said now, Thandiwe, because for me, Youth Month, but you're still finding 56% unemployment rate amongst the youth in South Africa. So yes, our parents might have experienced that violent racism. Runa, we're experiencing it where it entraps us. You know, it's an economic racism, institutional racism, it's structural racism. How do we change that? Because perhaps maybe after you've answered, how do you criminalize institutional racism that no one else can see, but you are experiencing it?
You know, I don't know about criminalizing, but I know that what is needed is some anti-racism education.
Okay.
We coming from a place where it's non-racialism, which didn't teach anything, that just said, we're fine, it's a democracy, everything's okay. So it is about dismantling these structures, dismantling whiteness, talking about these unconscious, conscious biases, looking at the practices that exclude black people.
Yeah. And perhaps maybe,
Yes, yes.
I mean, ke lebella taba ya gender-based violence, ke lebella taba ya racism. Go na le motho who's benefiting. There's somebody who's benefiting, somebody who's privileged, who's not letting go of that privilege. So right now, re kgopela gore makgowa, they need to let go of the whiteness, which is what gives them privilege. Is this something that is even possible?
You know, I'm so glad that you mentioned the word gender-based violence, because when I started this conversation, I said to you that all of these violences, black on black violence, white on black violence, gender-based violence, violence against queer people, are all part of the same system of oppression. And it's funny because while in America they're raging over this white oppression against black bodies, in South Africa we are experiencing both this kind of invisible whiteness, white oppression, as well as gender-based violence. So I think South Africa is a very interesting context in terms of understanding white heteropatriarchy. Let me make something very clear to you. The most threatening being to white heteropatriarchy, historically and even today, is the black woman. Now, what used to happen during the apartheid era is that black women were not allowed to come into the urban areas to come and work. Now, apartheid and whiteness understood that black labor was very necessary in order for the economy to grow. So they exploited black labor as much as possible. Black people would do maximum amount of work for the least amount of pay. But they would use mostly black male bodies, bring them into the cities, and then make them footwork into the peripheries and not stay in the quote unquote white areas. Now, what they would do on top of that is to tell black women to stay in the rural areas and for black women to exercise a whitewashed version of black African culture in order to brainwash women that they were subordinate to black men and to stay there. Because if black women were encouraged to come and work in the urban areas and settle down with their husband in the urban areas, black women would then reproduce black children, and the black population would reproduce close to the white areas and white population.
I love
so
how
if you look today, black women are relegated to staying in the rural areas. They are relegated to maybe working in the urban areas, but they don't live there. If you look at a place like Cape Town, black women and colored women cannot afford to stay in the city center of Cape Town. So the same structures that existed in apartheid still exist today.
You're opening it so wide because now I want to then ask, in this conversation, Tina, as Ulusha, in this new age, we look at what happened in 1976, 44 years ago. Today, we both, male and female, have a bigger role to play as Abantabasha, and even more so as the young men in this time and age. Do you feel at this time, we are actually understanding what we're fighting? Do we understand as the youth of today what we're fighting?
We're fighting so many things, so many different things. I think the problem with that is that we are trying to survive. I think that's just it. It's survival of the fittest.
But let me just quickly come in there, and maybe it will bring in Thandiwe and Leena. Are we consciously thinking about racism? Or have we been so desensitized, like we don't, unless we're not really connected to trying to fight racism? I mean, here's Ntokozo Sine. on social media, on Facebook. And I'm 16 years old, but still face racism at this age. For instance, when going to a white populated area, I'm scared. I don't know what they'll do to me. They gossip and point at me. It's hard. No black person must face what I face. I'm young, I did nothing wrong to them, but they still treat me like trash. Thandiwe.
It's difficult to say that, are we not aware of racism? I think we're very aware of racism. I'm not too sure that every single person understands how deeply entrenched racism is in our societies. I know, you're talking about being in the system. I also come from, Model C background, all of that. So my relationship with whiteness is incredibly close. So I know white people, white teachers, I know how white people are in their schools.
Thandiwe, have you ever dealt with it face to face where you had to address umngani wakho? And we are born with manje ukhipha ama comment abheke eceleni. Have you ever had to do that?
Yes.
Multiple times.
Yeah.
Tell me about the experience with what happened, like approach.
The thing is, I'm also an anti-racism writer, and my focus is in critical whiteness. So that's what I do. I critique white people.
And I'd like to go back to Thando, but before I go Thando, what is anti-racial? Because I want to understand, this thing, sometimes we don't acknowledge the difference, that there is black and white. And because we don't acknowledge this rainbow nation that we are all kumbayaring together. And I think acknowledging is very important, right? So when you say anti-racial, what exactly do you do? What do you speak about? What is the messaging?
Anti-racism is really, it's not to not hold white people accountable, because that's what happened before. So it's to really go inside and picket at those structures that were built to protect whiteness and to bring us down, to keep us down. So it's this dismantling that never happened before.
And what you're saying, maybe, Mrs. Thando, if you can briefly, because this social is quickly to go to ad break. How does the law allow us, emsebenzini, to have this voice without being seen like a terrorist?
So, Puti, let me just mention that we don't understand whiteness and racism and white heteropatriarchy. It is an ideology. Therefore, anyone can express it. This is why you come across black elitist people who perpetrate and perpetuate whiteness against other people of color. This is why you can have a colored person calling a black person a kafir, an Indian person calling a black person a kafir. When we understand whiteness as an ideology that is meant to segregate even people of color among one another, then we'll be able to deal with it. But right now, when we only see whiteness as something that can only be perpetrated by a white person against a black person, that's when we lose the plot. Whiteness and racism is so deeply entrenched in our society that you don't need to have a white person in the room for there to be an incident of white heteropatriarchy and racism in the room.
And we do apologize for some of the language that Thando is using. You can see passion. This ideology is what we need to fight. We don't need to, because at the end of the day, you see it in college causes passing during this lockdown. This ideology of whiteness, it's even in us. As
Asinibingelele kwi-Daily Thetha. Abantu abamnyama bahlukunyezwa kuphela phesheya. Yonke indawo eSouth Africa bayahlukunyezwa. Mawuthi yabuka special eThekwini namandiya ahleli phezu kwabantu. Imali abayiholayo incane kakhulu irate abayiholayo ngabo. Okusho ukuthi ubandlululo into esasele. Kodwa sithi no black president, kodwa kuyafana nje ubandlululo esasibambile. Ake nizame ukuthi nilungise nani lapho ningalungisa khona. Kodwa lokhu kwe-rate hour kuyangikhalisa kakhulu. India li-rate 100 rand wena u-rate 20 rand. Kodwa nenza umsebenzi oyi-1 yenzame ukuthi nilungise lapho. Sikube nje sayidini ukuthi bayacwasa ngokuthi babulawe. Ngesibuke la kwezokusebenza kuqala. Kwezokubulawa vele abantu abamnyama nje abafunwa sidalo. Abelungu ababafuni namandiya.
25 years later, and we sit in democracy, but is it really ngempela democracy? Ngempela awuyisinga ubandlululo kuphela, and as njengoba sikhala lamhlanje asikhali ngoba sifuna ukuthi sikhale kuphela, sifuna sikhale siye phambili sibonise ukuthi we want change, sifuna ukubona izinto zishintsha. Akukho mnandi ukuthi ufile ngathi you are not home usekhaya in a country like South Africa that is 81% kwabantu abamnyama, kodwa ithina futhi singahlelisanga kahle hayibo ngathi uyisivakashikini. Kodwa ke sajabuzwa hleli nathi la ku Daily Thetha on SABC 1. Umlayezo ungiqeda ungena besitshela ukuthi ke i-team ya Steve Hofmyer and of course bathumele i-email eshoyo ukuthi bayaxolisa ukuthi azange bakwazi ukuthi bebe khona, kodwa nakhona bebengathanda ukuba la nathi lamhlanje. So siya accept lokho nathi in this conversation, but also ahlelanga lapho kuphela sifuna ukuthi wena ekhaya usathini nange umnomzamo wakamacheke uthi I wonder where does this put me as a young person, young and black who's about to go into a professional space. How do I overcome such challenges?
Maybe Thandiwe, you can take that one.
We have to be strong, that's the problem. And also, these are real challenges that face Black people. Also, they're threatened by us when we enter these workspaces. Also, a lot of the times we're tokenized as well. So there are just so many factors that affect us where you cannot just enter the workspace like everybody else or enter the workspace like your white classmate who you've known since primary school. Yeah.
Sure.
And maybe Arubulele, Sesitando, are you still there with us?
I'm still there.
Criminalization. Yes, we've seen the incidents about Penny Sparrow, where they were, illegal cases that were opened against them. But maybe Kibu sets a back to Puchisho Yakaya earlier on, now, who criminalize a young institutional racism. How do you criminalize, structural racism?
Yes, I think I definitely think it's very possible, but I think for me, that's a response, right? I think what you want to do is to prevent. And the only way we can really prevent this thing from carrying on, this disease, this illness of this God complex, is for us to begin to tell our children the truth. Tell our children that they are not inferior, and tell our white kids that they are not superior. We need to have a subject in schools, in schools that is a standalone subject on its own that teaches kids about racism, about feminism, about patriarchy, about the entire old systems of oppression, and about equity in South Africa. And until we are deliberate and intentional about making that move, it doesn't matter what punitive action you have, because people will do it and they'll just maybe pay money or sit a few months in jail. I mean, it doesn't really work. We have to have preventative measures,
Sure.
But for me, also, on top of that, I just want to caution people at home about something, is that the most dangerous Black person, the most dangerous person to Black liberation is a Black person who is an elitist, who sees themselves in one way or another as distinguished from other Black people.
A better Black.
And that's what we saw during COVID-19. COVID-19 showed us that white monopoly capital is what runs this country, and that there are Black elitists who protect white monopoly capital. While the pandemic hit this country, white businesses and white monopoly capital was enabled to continue, while Black survivalist businesses and the informal sector, which is occupied mainly by Black people, was shut down completely, to the point that those people had to queue in lines that were as long as the lines of 1994 when we went to vote.
Warm, not just in winter, but to remember very much to our guest too. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today and sharing your story. It's June 16. It's still June 16, but before we go, your passing words is Siphosethu.
My passing words is stay strong, guys. It's wild out there, and nobody has your back better than you have your back. Protect yourself, always look out for number one, and never forget that the Almighty is always looking upon you, whatever that is for you.
Thandiwe, what can we teach our children that is anti-racial?
that that whiteness is misery, it's not superiority.
Sure. Sisivala, sibonge umbukeli. Happy Youth Day. Ukhumbule ukuthi you need to play your part. Ungathuli kuphela.
And I think also it's important within our numbers. Call racism out. And thank you. Bye.
Sibonge.
Lesale gabotse.